Chase Fitzgerald's boot hit Rowland P. Murphy square in the chest, sending the 42-year-old janitor stumbling backward into the weight rack. Metal clanged against metal as dumbbells crashed to the floor. Dirty mop water splashed across Rowland's worn uniform, while 25 wealthy students at Velocity Fight Club watched in uncomfortable silence.
Maybe if you spent less time watching real fighters train and more time doing your actual job, this place would actually be clean, Chase sneered, his voice carrying across the 10,000-square-foot gym with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Miami's Brickell Avenue.
Rowland slowly pushed himself upright. His hands moved into position without thought, left hand forward, right hand protecting his jaw, weight distributed perfectly between his feet. 40 years of muscle memory awakening for just a moment before he forced himself to relax, to remember he wasn't that man anymore.
Chase didn't notice. He never noticed anything real. But Coach Vincent Torres noticed from across the room. The 60-year-old Cuban trainer had been watching Rowland for months, recognizing something in the way the quiet janitor moved. Economy of motion, situational awareness, the invisible discipline of someone trained to kill. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The kind that reminds you how often the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Rowland bent to retrieve his mop, his weathered hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, from something deeper, the effort it took to keep the warrior buried, to stay invisible in a world that had once demanded everything from him. "There," Chase said, kicking the mop bucket over. Dirty water cascaded across the premium rubber flooring, soaking through Rowland's pants. "Now you've got something real to clean up." The students shifted uncomfortably. Elena Rodriguez, the gym manager, looked down at her phone, avoiding the scene entirely. But Rowland's eyes, dark brown and carrying weight Chase couldn't begin to understand, held something that made two of the closer students take a step back. 20 years of his father's training, 12 years as a Navy SEAL, 8 brothers lost in an Afghan valley because he'd made the wrong call, 7 years of choosing to be invisible rather than dangerous. Chase stepped over him like he was debris. "Maybe next time you'll remember your place." Rowland said nothing. He never said anything. Speaking meant being seen, and being seen meant someone might ask him to lead again. He couldn't lead, not after what happened, not after dismissing his younger brother's warning about that valley approach, not after carrying 8 flag-draped coffins home in his mind every single night for 7 years. Have you ever been so broken by a single decision that you chose to disappear rather than risk making another? Rowland grabbed the mop and began cleaning the water Chase had spilled, his movements methodical and precise. The same precision that had made him one of the most effective team leaders in naval special warfare. The same precision that had failed him when it mattered most. As the students returned to their training and Chase strutted toward his private office, none of them knew they were watching a dead man pretend to be alive. Only Coach Torres kept watching, his experienced eyes seeing what Chase's ego never could. The way Rowland's shoulders carried military posture beneath the slouch, the way his eyes tracked every person in the room without seeming to look, the way his hands had formed a combat stance so instinctively that stopping it looked painful. "Be careful, Chase," Torres whispered to himself. "You have no idea what you just pushed." But Chase Fitzgerald never listened to warnings from men who actually knew what fighting meant. And Lieutenant Rowland P. Murphy had spent 7 years making sure no one would ever have to follow his leadership into death again. The collision between Chase's ego and Rowland's buried truth was inevitable. It was just a matter of time. Rowland arrived at Velocity Fight Club every evening at exactly 6 p.m., slipping through the rear service entrance like a shadow. His cleaning cart was already stocked: industrial cleaner, microfiber towels, fresh mop heads, everything in its proper place. Organization was survival. His father had taught him that in the boxing gym. The Navy had reinforced it with blood. The gym sprawled across prime Miami real estate, all chrome fixtures and motivational quotes on exposed brick walls. Rich tech entrepreneurs paid $300 monthly memberships to train alongside Instagram influencers and trust fund athletes. They came to feel dangerous without ever actually being in danger.
Rowland made himself part of the scenery, emptying trash bins, wiping down equipment, mopping the octagon ring where Chase performed his theatrical coaching sessions. The former SEAL had perfected the art of being looked through rather than looked at. What none of them knew was that Rowland P. Murphy had forgotten more about fighting than most of them would ever learn. His father, Patrick the Architect Murphy, had been one of boxing's legendary trainers, the man who'd refined Mike Tyson's devastating combinations, who'd shaped 3 world champions before retiring to a small gym in Philadelphia where he'd trained his 2 sons with the same intensity he'd given to professionals. Fighting isn't about anger, his father had told 10-year-old Rowland and 8-year-old Kevin. It's about perfect technique applied with complete control. Angry fighters make mistakes. Disciplined fighters make history. Rowland and Kevin had grown up in that gym, their childhood measured in rounds rather than years. Martial arts wasn't a hobby, it was the Murphy family religion. Their father had given them a gift most men spent lifetimes trying to develop, the ability to remain calm when violence exploded around them. That training had led both brothers to the Navy. Kevin had followed Rowland into the SEALs 3 years later, determined to serve on his older brother's team. They deployed together to Afghanistan, 2 Murphy brothers carrying their father's discipline into the mountains where America's enemies hid. Until Rowland made the call that killed him. The memory hit him as he emptied trash near the heavy bags. Kevin's voice over the radio. "Rowland, the valley approach feels wrong. The terrain's too perfect for an ambush. Let's take the ridge route instead."
And Rowland's response, confident in his experience, dismissive of his younger brother's instinct, "Negative. Valley route cuts 2 hours off our timeline. We proceed as planned."
4 hours later, 8 men were dead. Kevin had taken 3 rounds to the chest in the first 30 seconds of the ambush, dying while trying to reach the radio to call for support. The rest of Rowland's team had been picked off systematically by insurgents who'd prepared the kill zone exactly as Kevin had predicted. Rowland had survived with 2 bullets in his leg and shrapnel in his shoulder. He'd killed 11 enemy fighters during the extraction. He'd received commendations for leadership under fire. He'd killed his baby brother through arrogance. "Dad, I'm home!" Iris's voice pulled Rowland back to the present as he pulled into their modest Coral Gables apartment complex at 2:15 a.m. His 17-year-old daughter was supposed to be asleep, but he found her at the kitchen table surrounded by college application materials. "You should be resting," Rowland said gently, setting down his work bag. "Stanford's essay prompts are brutal," Iris replied, pushing dark hair from her face. She had her mother's beauty, but thankfully her father's work ethic. "How was work?" "Same as always." She studied him with intelligent eyes that saw more than he wanted them to. "You're exhausted, Dad. There have to be better jobs than night janitorial work." If only she knew. His storage unit across town held the truth he'd never shared. His father's championship belts and training journals, his own Navy commendations and service records, Kevin's folded flag and portrait in dress blues. The evidence of who Rowland Murphy had been before he decided that being invisible was safer than being responsible. The divorce had been the final nail. His ex-wife Vanessa had filed for separation 2 months after he'd left the military, citing irreconcilable differences. Then her lawyer had added domestic violence accusations, complete fabrications designed to secure full custody and freedom. Lieutenant Murphy exhibits clear signs of mental instability related to combat trauma, the lawyer had claimed. He requires extensive therapy and should not have unsupervised access to the child. Rowland had been stable. Broken, perhaps, but not unstable. He'd never raised a hand to Vanessa, never threatened her, never shown anything but the quiet grief of a man processing impossible loss. But the accusations had served their purpose. Vanessa had wanted the freedom to return to the life she'd enjoyed while he'd been deployed. Other men, late nights, the excitement he could never provide after Kevin's death had hollowed him out. Her new boyfriend had moved in within 3 months. He wouldn't be the last. But she'd left him Iris, the one perfect thing Rowland had left in his life. "I'm saving for your college fund,"
Rowland said simply. "That's what matters."
Iris squeezed his hand. "You matter too, Dad."
If only that were true. Coach Torres found Rowland cleaning the locker rooms at 11:30 p.m. the next evening. The old Cuban leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the janitor work with unusual intensity. "I know what you are," Torres said quietly. Rowland didn't look up. "A janitor." "Bullshit. I've trained fighters for 35 years. You move like someone trained to kill, not just fight. Military?" Silence stretched between them. "Your secret's safe," Torres continued, "but Chase is going to notice eventually. He's insecure enough to see threats everywhere. And when he does—" "I'll handle it," Rowland said, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone who'd handled worse. Torres nodded slowly. "I hope so, because that boy doesn't fight fair." Neither did ambushes in Afghan valleys. But Rowland had learned to survive those too. Even if survival felt like punishment. Chase Fitzgerald noticed 3 days later. Rowland was cleaning mirrors near the training floor when Chase demonstrated a defense against a rear takedown. The technique was fundamentally wrong. Weight distribution off, grip positioning that left the defender vulnerable, footwork that would collapse under real pressure. "See how I keep my hips back?" Chase explained to Bradley Chen, a 26-year-old software executive paying $500 an hour for private sessions. "This creates distance from the attacker."
"No," Rowland whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it.
The gym fell silent. Chase froze mid-demonstration. "What did you say?" Rowland kept his eyes on the mirror, cursing himself. 7 years of invisibility, shattered by one unconscious word. "Nothing, sir. Sorry." "No, please." Chase's voice dripped with condescension. "The janitor wants to teach technique now? You think pushing a mop qualifies you to instruct my clients?" 20 students had stopped training to watch. Elena Rodriguez stood behind the front desk, her hand moving toward her phone. Chase stepped closer, invading Rowland's space. "I said, did you just try to correct my instruction?" Rowland met his eyes for the first time. Big mistake. Because what Chase saw there, the absolute calm of someone who'd killed more men than Chase had ever fought, registered as a threat Chase's fragile ego couldn't tolerate. "Your hip positioning leaves you vulnerable to forward pressure," Rowland said quietly. "The grip is too high. Real attacker would drop their level and drive through your center line." The words came from 40 years of training, from his father's gym, from SEAL combatives, from actual combat where technique meant survival. Chase's face flushed red. "Who the hell do you think you're talking to?" "Someone teaching incorrect technique that could get your clients hurt." The room erupted in murmurs. Bradley Chen looked between Chase and Rowland with confused curiosity. Coach Torres appeared from the back office, recognizing danger. Chase's humiliation was complete and public. His students were looking at him differently now, questions forming in their previously trusting eyes. He needed to destroy this challenge immediately and permanently. "Fine," Chase said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Demonstrate proper technique for the class." The trap was perfect. Refuse and look like a fraud. Comply and reveal himself. Rowland shook his head. "I just clean here. I am ordering you to demonstrate. Unless you're admitting you don't know what you're talking about?" Coach Torres stepped forward. "Chase, this isn't—" "Stay out of this, old man. I want to see what our expert janitor knows." Every phone in the gym was out now, recording. Rowland could walk away, probably get fired, find another invisible job. But something in Chase's eyes, the entitled cruelty of someone who'd never faced real consequences, triggered something Rowland had kept buried since Afghanistan. He walked to the heavy bag and demonstrated the proper defense. His movement was efficient, economical, devastatingly effective. The technique his father had taught him at 13, refined by a decade in naval special warfare. His counter takedown dropped an imaginary attacker in 1.3 seconds. The students stared in stunned silence. Chase's face went from red to purple. "Don't you ever disrespect me in my gym again, or you'll be looking for a new job tomorrow." But they both knew the damage was done. The students had seen something that would haunt Chase's nightmares.
proof that the janitor knew more about fighting than their expensive instructor.
That night, Chase began his research. By morning, he'd found fragments of the story. Military database searches revealed Lieutenant Rowland P. Murphy, Navy SEAL, Afghanistan veteran, team leader during Operation Enduring Freedom. Honorable discharge. No details about why he'd left. Then Chase found the divorce records, domestic violence allegations, accusations of mental instability, court-ordered therapy recommendations. Chase smiled at his computer screen. He'd just found the nuclear weapon to destroy his threat permanently. Week 1 of systematic harassment began the next day. Chase scheduled emergency cleaning during peak training hours, forcing Rowland to mop around active sparring sessions. Students would sweat and bleed on floors Rowland had just cleaned, and Chase would stand over him, arms crossed, ensuring maximum degradation. "Careful around the equipment," Chase would announce loudly. "We can't have you breaking anything expensive. Therapy's expensive enough, right?" The word therapy became Chase's favorite weapon, delivered with just enough emphasis to trigger knowing looks from students who'd heard whispers about the unstable janitor with the violent past. Elena Rodriguez watched from the front desk, taking notes she hoped she'd never need to use. Rowland endured it all with the patience of a man who'd survived worse. Iris needed her college fund. His guilt over Kevin's death wouldn't let him believe he deserved to fight back. And somewhere deep down, a part of him believed he deserved Chase's cruelty. Punishment for the decision that had killed 8 brothers. But Coach Torres watched Chase's campaign with growing concern. He'd seen bullies before. He'd also seen what happened when they pushed trained warriors too far. "You don't have to take this," Torres told Rowland during a late-night conversation by the equipment storage. "Yes, I do," Rowland replied, his voice carrying the weight of 7 years of self-imposed penance. "Why?" Rowland's eyes drifted to the photo on his phone, Iris smiling at her high school graduation. "Because I've already destroyed enough lives. I won't risk destroying hers." Torres nodded slowly, understanding but disagreeing, because he knew something Rowland had forgotten. Sometimes the greatest destruction comes from refusing to fight back. 3 months of systematic destruction followed the heavy bag incident. Chase turned Rowland's humiliation into performance art. Every morning he'd arrive early to inspect the overnight cleaning, finding fault with perfectly spotless surfaces. "This mirror has streaks," Chase would announce, pointing at invisible flaws. "Do it again." Rowland would re-clean the same surface 3 times while Chase watched with satisfaction, often filming the process for his Instagram stories with captions like "Attention to detail matters" and "Knowing your role." The degradation became Chase's daily ritual. He'd time his bathroom breaks to coincide with Rowland's presence, ensuring he could deliver fresh insults about accepting limitations and understanding hierarchies. Other trainers began avoiding the confrontations, unwilling to witness the systematic destruction of a man's dignity. But Chase's true mastery was psychological. He'd found those old divorce records and began weaving them into his harassment with surgical precision. "Therapy helping you manage that temper?" He'd ask loudly enough for students to hear. "We run a safe facility here. Can't have unstable people around the equipment." The whispers spread. Students who'd once ignored Rowland now gave him wide berth, their expressions mixing pity and fear. The dangerous janitor with the violent past who needed professional help. Elena Rodriguez kept Chase's harassment complaints in a locked filing cabinet. 2 other staff members had quit in the past year, citing hostile work environment. But she was a single mother herself, and standing up to Chase meant losing her own livelihood. Week 6 brought physical escalation. Chase began accidentally kicking equipment into Rowland's path, forcing him to clean around obstacles. He'd time his loudest training sessions for exactly when Rowland needed to clean nearby areas, ensuring maximum disruption. He'd invite students to share their thoughts about people who can't accept reality, while Rowland worked within earshot. "Some guys think military service makes them special," Chase announced during a group session, loud enough for Rowland to hear from across the gym. "But civilian life requires different skills. Some people just can't adapt." Rowland absorbed each cut like body shots, staying on his feet through sheer willpower. Iris's Stanford application was due in 3 months. Her essay about overcoming adversity after losing her mother to divorce and her uncle to war had made her guidance counselor cry. She had a real chance. That chance was worth any humiliation Chase could deliver.
But the harassment was affecting Iris anyway. She'd noticed her father coming home with tension headaches, with shoulders more slumped than usual, with eyes that looked even more haunted than normal.
"Dad, did something happen at work?" she asked one night over their modest dinner of pasta and vegetables.
"Just tired, sweetheart. Long shift."
"You're always tired now." Her voice carried worry that made Rowland's chest tight. "Maybe you should find something else. I can take a gap year, work, help with."
"No." The word came out harder than intended. Rowland softened his tone. "You're going to college on schedule. That's not negotiable." What he couldn't tell her was that his domestic violence record made him unemployable at any legitimate gym, that his SEAL background scared most civilian employers who saw veterans as ticking time bombs, that janitorial work under a simplified version of his name was one of the few options available to a man the legal system had labeled dangerous and unstable. Week 9 brought Chase's masterpiece of cruelty. Security footage of Rowland's heavy bag demonstration, the one that had started this nightmare, appeared on Chase's Instagram account with the caption, "When the help thinks they know better than certified professionals, #KnowYourPlace, #humility, #VelocityFightClub." The video exploded. Within hours, it had 15,000 views and hundreds of comments, most of them ugly. "Janitor thinks he's a fighter," read one comment with 200 likes. "Somebody's been watching too much UFC, laughed another. "Bet he got fired after this," someone predicted hopefully. Iris found the video on a Sunday afternoon. Rowland discovered her in her bedroom, phone in her hands, tears streaming down her face as she read comments calling her father everything from delusional to dangerous. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what?" "That you know how to fight. Really fight." She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. The comments mentioned military records. One person posted something about Navy SEALs. "Dad, who are you?" Rowland sat heavily on her bed. The truth he'd protected her from for 7 years, suddenly unavoidable. Someone who made terrible mistakes. Someone who doesn't deserve to be anything more than what I am now. "That's not true." "It is." His voice carried the weight of 8 flag-draped coffins. "I led good men into an ambush because I was too arrogant to listen to a warning. Your Uncle Kevin died because of my decision. 7 others died because I thought I knew better." Iris threw her arms around him, and for the first time since Afghanistan, Rowland P. Murphy allowed himself to cry. But tears wouldn't stop what was coming. Because Chase Fitzgerald had tasted blood, and men like him never stopped until their prey was completely destroyed. Week 11 broke Rowland's carefully maintained invisibility. Chase had begun using him as a training prop, calling him over during demonstrations to hold pads or stand as a passive opponent. It was humiliation disguised as inclusion, and everyone knew it. "Rowland, come hold these focus mitts," Chase commanded during a busy Tuesday evening session with 30 students watching. Rowland looked up from organizing equipment. "I'm not trained for that, sir." "You seemed pretty confident about technique a few months ago. Hold the mitts." Coach Torres stepped forward from the corner. "Chase, this isn't appropriate. He's not insured as training staff." "I'm the head trainer here, Vincent. Stay in your lane." 30 students formed a circle as Rowland reluctantly picked up the focus mitts. Chase began with light combinations, showing off for his audience, gradually increasing power with each strike. "See how I'm rotating my hips?" Chase explained while throwing increasingly heavy shots. "Power comes from the core, not just the arms." Rowland absorbed each impact without complaint, his military training keeping his face neutral, even as his hands began to ache from Chase's poor technique. All arm strength, minimal efficiency. The kind of striking that looked impressive, but would gas out in 90 seconds against real resistance. But Chase wasn't done. He began throwing combinations that intentionally missed the mitts, glancing off Rowland's forearms and shoulders. "Oops," Chase said with fake concern. "Better hand positioning next time." The accidental hook that caught Rowland's left shoulder, his old shrapnel injury from Afghanistan, sent lightning bolts of pain down his arm. Rowland dropped the mitts, his right hand instinctively forming a fist before he caught himself.
Kevin's voice echoed in his memory. "Rowland, the approach feels wrong."
And his own arrogant dismissal. "We proceed as planned." Rowland forced his fist open and stepped back.
"That's right. Walk away like you always do," Chase called after him. "At least you know your place."
But something had shifted in Rowland's eyes. Coach Torres saw it. Elena Rodriguez saw it. Even some of the students saw it. The warrior was waking up. And when he finally stopped retreating, Chase Fitzgerald would learn the difference between performing violence and surviving it. That night, Chase's obsessive research intensified. He'd already found the basic military records and divorce documents. Now he went deeper, pulling deployment records through a private investigator who specialized in background checks. The report arrived 3 days later, and Chase read it with growing excitement. Lieutenant Rowland P. Murphy, SEAL Team 7. Multiple combat deployments. Team leader during Operation Enduring Freedom. Entire squad KIA during ambush in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. Subject survived with injuries. Honorable discharge following incident. Divorce proceedings initiated 2 months post-discharge. Domestic violence allegations filed by spouse. Unproven, charges dropped. Court recommended therapy for PTSD and anger management. Chase had found his nuclear weapon. A trained killer with a dead team, a history of alleged violence, and documented mental health concerns. This wasn't just ammunition to fire Rowland. This was ammunition to destroy him completely, while appearing concerned for public safety. The next morning, Chase called an emergency staff meeting. "I need to address a serious safety concern," Chase announced to Elena, Coach Torres, and the 2 other part-time trainers. "Our night janitor has been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. I've discovered he has an extensive military combat background he deliberately concealed during hiring, along with a documented history of domestic violence and mental instability."
"That's bullshit," Coach Torres interrupted. "Rowland is the most stable person in this building."
"Really? Because his ex-wife's lawyer specifically cited concerns about his mental state. The man lost his entire military team in combat and never received proper treatment. He's potentially dangerous." Elena shifted uncomfortably. "Chase, if you're concerned, maybe we should just let him go quietly. No need to." "No need to what? Protect our clients?" Chase's voice rose with righteous indignation. "What happens when this unstable veteran snaps during peak hours? We have a responsibility." What Chase didn't say was that quietly firing Rowland wouldn't satisfy his need for total domination. He needed Rowland publicly destroyed, humiliated beyond recovery, as punishment for daring to challenge his authority. The trap was set. Now Chase just needed to spring it. Week 12 brought the final provocation. Chase scheduled a team-building exercise, a light sparring demonstration for students to see different skill levels in action. He'd arranged for 3 of his most athletic clients to participate in controlled rounds. Then he added Rowland's name to the list. "I think it would be educational for our students to see how real military combat training translates to sport fighting," Chase announced during the Wednesday evening class. "Rowland has graciously agreed to demonstrate." Rowland had agreed to no such thing. He was mopping near the equipment storage when he heard his name. "I'm not doing that," Rowland said quietly. "Are you refusing a direct instruction from your supervisor?" The students watched with uncomfortable fascination. Coach Torres moved closer, ready to intervene. "I'm a janitor, not a hider." "But you were a fighter, weren't you? Navy SEAL team leader? Extensive combat experience. You've been hiding that from everyone here." Chase's voice carried across the gym. "Unless you're afraid to show what you can actually do?" The challenge was public, recorded on multiple phones, designed to force Rowland into an impossible choice: fight and reveal himself, refuse and confirm he's a fraud who talks big but performs small. Rowland stood perfectly still, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of 35 sets of eyes on him. "I'm afraid," Rowland said quietly, "of what happens when I stop holding back." The words hung in the air like a threat and a warning and a prophecy. Chase laughed, but there was nervousness in it now. Big talk from a janitor. You know what? Forget the demonstration. You're fired. Clean out your locker and leave the premises.
You can't fire him for refusing to fight, Coach Torres objected. I can fire him for insubordination and for concealing relevant background information during the hiring process. He's a documented security risk.
Elena looked miserable, but said nothing. The other trainers avoided eye contact.
Rowland felt the walls closing in. No job, no income, Iris's college fund evaporating. 7 years of invisible penance destroyed by an entitled child playing at dominance.
Wait, Rowland said. Chase smiled. Changed your mind?
You want to settle this? Fine. Give me 1 round. You and me. Winner stays at velocity. Loser leaves permanently. The gym erupted in excited murmurs. Students were already pulling out phones, texting friends, posting to social media. This was the content they'd been craving. Chase's smile widened. This was even better than he'd planned. He'd destroy Rowland publicly, on video, then have him arrested for assaulting a supervisor when his PTSD inevitably made him fight dirty. Friday night, after hours, be ready to pack your shit.
As Rowland walked away, Coach Torres caught his arm. Do you know what you just agreed to?
Yeah, Rowland said quietly. I agreed to stop hiding.
If you knew how often powerful people dig up old accusations just to bury dangerous truths, you'd never want to miss the stories that expose how they do it.
The fight was set. The videos were spreading. And Lieutenant Rowland P. Murphy had just made the first command decision since Afghanistan that he couldn't take back. The video of Chase's challenge went viral within hours. By Thursday morning, Velocity Fight Club trainer versus janitor was trending on local Miami Twitter. By afternoon, amateur MMA forums across the country were discussing it. By evening, betting sites were taking odds. Chase spent the week turning his social media presence into a promotional machine. His Instagram stories showed intense training montages with dramatic music, shadowboxing sessions, and carefully worded captions about addressing dangerous situations before they escalate. But his private posts to close friends told the real story. About to end this unstable vet's whole career. Guy's got PTSD and a history of violence, doing everyone a favor. The Whisper campaign was perfectly executed. Chase's version of events spread through Velocity's client base like poison. The dangerous veteran who'd hidden his violent past, the concerned trainer trying to protect his students, the unfortunate necessity of public confrontation. By Friday morning, the narrative was set. Chase Fitzgerald, protector. Rowland Murphy, threat. Rowland spent the week preparing differently, not in the gym, but in the storage unit where he kept the remnants of his former life. He stood before Kevin's portrait in dress blues, his younger brother's confident smile frozen in time. I'm sorry, Rowland whispered. I should have listened to you, about everything. His father's old training journal sat in boxes nearby. Decades of technical notes, combination sequences, coaching philosophies. Patrick the architect Murphy had built champions with discipline and precision. He taught his sons that fighting was about control, not chaos. Rowland hadn't controlled anything in 7 years. He'd let guilt control him, let fear control him, let Chase Fitzgerald control him. Maybe it was time to remember what control actually felt like. Iris found him in the garage Thursday night, going through old hand-wrapping techniques. She'd been quiet since discovering his military past, processing the revelation that her quiet father was someone else entirely. Are you really going to fight him? She asked.
Yeah. Will you win?
Rowland met his daughter's eyes. Yes. Then what? He's already told everyone you're dangerous. He's shown people your divorce records, your military file. Win or lose, he's destroying your reputation. She was right. Chase had already won the narrative battle. The fight itself was almost irrelevant now. Then I fight anyway, Rowland said quietly, because sometimes standing up is more important than winning. Friday evening transformed Velocity Fight Club into a coliseum. Word had spread beyond social media. Over 200 people had requested access to watch. Current members, former members, local MMA enthusiasts, sports bloggers, and content creators smelling viral gold. Elena Rodriguez had implemented a reservation system,
but dozens more gathered in the parking lot, watching through windows and filming from outside. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation.
Chase arrived at 8 p.m. in designer athletic wear, his entrance carefully staged for maximum dramatic impact. He'd brought Tyler Morrison, a loyal student, to serve as his corner. His warm-up routine was pure theater, aggressive shadowboxing, loud breathing, intimidating stares at the growing crowd.
Rowland entered through the back door at 8:15 p.m., wearing simple black shorts and a worn gray t-shirt. No fanfare, no performance. Coach Torres walked beside him, carrying hand wraps and a concerned expression.
"You don't have to do this," Torres said for the 10th time.
"Yeah, I do."
"Why?"
Rowland looked at the crowd, at the phones already recording, at Chase performing for his audience. "Because I've been running from leadership since Afghanistan. Tonight, I stop running." The makeshift ring was nothing more than taped boundaries on the main training floor. Chase had insisted on minimal rules, 3 3-minute rounds or until someone couldn't continue. Elena would serve as reluctant referee. At 8:30 p.m., both men stepped into the circle. "Everyone ready?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise.
Chase bounced on his toes, muscles pumped from his warm-up, talking constantly to mask his growing nervousness. "Hope you're ready for this. Time to show everyone what happens when you disrespect real fighters."
Rowland stood perfectly still, breathing slowly, his dark eyes focused with the kind of calm that comes from having survived much worse than privileged children playing at violence. When Chase extended his gloves for the traditional touch, Rowland met them with quiet respect. "Touch gloves and keep it clean," Elena said. "Fight!" Chase rushed forward immediately, throwing wild haymakers designed to end everything in the first 10 seconds. He wanted a spectacular knockout that would go viral for all the right reasons, cementing his reputation as the alpha who'd put down a dangerous threat.
But Rowland wasn't there.
The first punch missed by inches as Rowland slipped right with minimal movement. Economy of motion, his father's fundamental principle. The second swing caught nothing but air as Rowland ducked smoothly. Chase's third attempt, a looping overhand right, passed harmlessly over Rowland's head as he stepped inside the arc. The crowd's excitement shifted to confusion. Where was the violence they'd been promised? Rowland spent the first 90 seconds making Chase look foolish. Every attack was slipped, blocked, or avoided with the kind of defensive mastery that comes from 40 years of training. He threw exactly 2 punches, light jabs that snapped Chase's head back and reminded everyone watching that he was being toyed with. "Stand still!" Chase shouted, already breathing heavily from punches that hit nothing.
Rowland said nothing. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Let angry fighters exhaust themselves. Disciplined fighters wait for the perfect moment.
By the 2-minute mark, Chase's technique had completely deteriorated. His punches were arm-heavy, his footwork sloppy, his defense non-existent. Sweat poured down his face as he realized what everyone else had already figured out. He was fighting someone so far above his level it wasn't even a competition. Coach Torres leaned close to Rowland during the 30-second break. "You're embarrassing him. Be careful. Embarrassed men do desperate things." Rowland nodded. He'd seen desperation in Afghanistan, in courtrooms, in his ex-wife's lawyer's eyes when fabricating accusations. Desperation was dangerous, but it also revealed truth. Round 2 began with Chase attempting to be tactical, but fear had replaced his confidence. When Rowland finally began countering perfect combinations that his father had taught him at 13, refined by a decade in naval special warfare, Chase's world fell apart. A crisp jab cross caught him clean. A hook to the body doubled him over. An uppercut snapped his head back. The crowd was on its feet. Phones captured every moment as Chase Fitzgerald, the gym's supposed alpha, was systematically dismantled by a man he'd called just the help. Round 3 never really happened. Chase came out desperate, throwing everything he had in wild, uncontrolled combinations. His form was completely gone, his defense non-existent, his cardio shot. He was fighting on ego and fear now. Rowland had seen enough. Chase charged forward with a telegraphed right cross, putting all his weight behind a punch that would have knocked out an amateur. Rowland stepped inside the punch, his left hand coming up in a perfect counterhook, the same combination his father had used to prepare Mike Tyson, taught to a 10-year-old boy in a Philadelphia gym 40 years ago, and caught Chase on the point of his jaw with surgical precision.
The sound was like a gunshot.
Chase Fitzgerald crumpled to the floor instantly, his body going completely limp before he hit the mats. 10 seconds. One punch. Everything changed. The room fell silent, except for the sound of dozens of phones capturing the moment that would define both men's futures. Rowland immediately dropped to one knee beside Chase, checking his pulse and breathing with the professionalism of someone trained in combat medicine. Chase's eyes fluttered open after 20 seconds, confusion and fear replacing the arrogance that had defined him for months.
"Stay still," Rowland said quietly. "You might have a concussion."
Chase nodded weakly, his pride more damaged than his jaw. As Rowland helped him sit up slowly, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. They'd just witnessed something extraordinary, not just a knockout, but a complete exposure of fraudulent authority by suppressed truth.
Coach Torres handed Rowland a towel. "You okay?"
Yeah, but Rowland's hands were shaking slightly, not from the fight, but from what he'd finally allowed himself to become again, a warrior who'd stopped running from his own capability.
Elena Rodriguez knelt beside Chase. "Can you stand?"
"I'm fine," Chase muttered, though his legs wobbled as Tyler Morrison helped him to his feet. His face was already swelling, but the real damage was to something much harder to heal: his reputation.
The videos were already uploading. Within minutes, Velocity Trainer knocked out by Janitor was spreading across every platform: TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. The footage was crystal clear. Chase's aggressive assault, Rowland's defensive mastery, the perfect counterpunch that ended everything in one surgical strike. Professional MMA fighters began sharing the clip with commentary about Rowland's flawless technique and incredible restraint. Former SEALs recognized the combat efficiency in his movement. Boxing coaches saw Patrick Murphy's legendary training in every combination.
Justice for Rowland began trending within the hour.
But Chase Fitzgerald had spent his entire life learning how to turn losses into someone else's fault. By midnight, he was on the phone with Richard Kellerman, an expensive Miami attorney who specialized in turning viral embarrassments into legal victories. "He assaulted me," Chase said, his jaw wrapped in ice. "I was trying to give him a chance to demonstrate skills for educational purposes, and he attacked me with professional-level violence. The man's a trained killer who concealed his background. This was premeditated." Kellerman watched the viral videos with practiced eyes. "Your initial aggression is going to be a problem. He's got a documented history of domestic violence and mental instability, PTSD from combat trauma. The court already flagged him as dangerous 7 years ago. This wasn't a fair fight. It was an unstable veteran with lethal training attacking a civilian instructor."
"Now that," Kellerman said with a smile, "we can work with."
The arrest happened at Rowland's apartment at 6 a.m. Sunday morning.
Iris watched through their kitchen window as 3 Miami-Dade police officers led her father away in handcuffs, her 17-year-old heart shattering as neighbors emerged from their units to witness the spectacle.
"Dad!" she screamed, running to the door.
"It's okay, Iris," Rowland called back, his voice steady despite the handcuffs. "Call Coach Torres. He'll help you."
"Rowland P. Murphy, you're under arrest for aggravated assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm," the lead officer recited. "You have the right to remain silent." As they pushed him into the patrol car, Rowland caught his daughter's eyes one last time. The look of betrayal and confusion on her face hurt worse than anything Chase had done. By Sunday afternoon, Chase's media blitz was in full swing. He appeared on local morning shows with his jaw dramatically wrapped, speaking softly about his traumatic experience and his genuine fear for his safety and the safety of our students. "I tried to help Rowland," Chase told Channel 7's sympathetic anchor, his voice breaking at carefully rehearsed moments. "I knew about his military background, his struggles with PTSD. I thought giving him an opportunity to channel his aggression in a controlled environment might help. Instead, he used professional combat training to try to kill me in front of 200 witnesses." The selective editing was masterful.
News segments showed Rowland's knockout punch, but omitted the months of harassment, the forced confrontation, Chase's aggressive assault. The narrative painted Rowland as an unstable veteran with a violent past who'd deceived his employer and attacked without provocation. Social media algorithms pushed Chase's version to audiences already predisposed to believe it. Local Facebook groups filled with comments about dangerous veterans and PTSD ticking time bombs who don't belong in civilized society. The original Justice for Rowland hashtag was overwhelmed by Justice for Chase posts, calling for Rowland's imprisonment and demanding better protection for civilian trainers dealing with unstable military personnel. Have you ever won a battle only to face a war you thought was over?
By Monday morning, prosecutors had filed felony charges.
The defendant deliberately concealed his extensive military combat training and documented history of violent behavior, Assistant State Attorney Marcus Webb announced at the press conference. Lieutenant Murphy is a former Navy SEAL with expertise in lethal hand-to-hand combat. His attack on Mr. Fitzgerald, a civilian athletic instructor, demonstrates a callous disregard for human life and a pattern of violence consistent with his prior domestic abuse allegations. The bail hearing was standing room only. Chase sat in the front row with Kellerman, his bandaged jaw drawing sympathetic looks from court staff. Rowland appeared in County Jail Orange, his court-appointed attorney, Jennifer Walsh, an overworked public defender handling 53 other cases, looking exhausted before the proceedings even began.
Your Honor, Mr. Murphy is a clear danger to the community, Webb argued. He has military training in lethal combat techniques, a documented history of domestic violence allegations, and has demonstrated willingness to use extreme force against civilians. We request bail be set at $500,000.
That's outrageous, Walsh objected weakly. Mr. Murphy has no prior criminal convictions, strong community ties through his daughter. His ex-wife's divorce attorney specifically cited concerns about his mental stability and potential for violence, Webb interrupted. Court records show recommendations for psychiatric evaluation and anger management therapy that Mr. Murphy refused to complete. The lie hung in the courtroom air. Rowland had never refused therapy. He'd never needed it in the first place. But the accusation had been enough to poison the record 7 years ago, and it was poisoning the present now. Bail is set at $250,000, Judge Patricia Hawkins announced. Defendant is ordered to wear a GPS monitor and maintain distance of at least 500 feet from Velocity Fight Club and all associated personnel. Rowland couldn't make $25,000 for a bail bondsman. He'd spent everything on Iris's college fund. As they led him back to holding, he caught sight of his daughter in the gallery, tears streaming down her face. Coach Torres sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders, his weathered face creased with concern.
That night, Iris Murphy made a decision that would change everything.
If the legal system wouldn't fight for her father, she would find the truth herself, starting with the one question that had haunted her since the arrest. What really happened during her parents' divorce? Her mother, Vanessa, lived in Coral Gables with her current boyfriend, the third since the divorce. Iris hadn't visited in 6 months. Their relationship strained by years of Vanessa's criticism of Rowland's lack of ambition and emotional unavailability. But Vanessa kept everything, every document, every record, every piece of evidence from her carefully constructed life. And somewhere in that evidence was the truth about the domestic violence accusation that had destroyed her father's life 7 years ago. Iris waited until Tuesday afternoon, when Vanessa would be at her Pilates class, before using her old key to slip into her mother's townhouse. The home office was exactly as she remembered, meticulously organized, color-coded filing system, everything labeled and dated. Vanessa's need for control extended to every aspect of her existence. Iris found the divorce file in the third drawer, Murphy v. Murphy, 2016-2017. Inside were the court documents she'd expected, custody agreements, asset division, and the domestic violence complaint filed by Vanessa's attorney, Gerald Hoffman. But underneath those official documents was something else, something that made Iris's blood run cold. Email exchanges between Vanessa and Hoffman dated 3 weeks before the complaint was filed. Needs stronger leverage for custody. He won't fight me on anything else, but he'll never give up Iris. Hoffman, standard emotional distress claims won't be enough against a decorated veteran. Needs something that raises safety concerns.
What do you suggest? Hoffman, domestic violence allegation. Doesn't need to be proven, just filed. Combined with his recent discharge and the Afghanistan incident, it'll paint a picture of instability. Court-recommended therapy will make it official record.
He never touched me.
Hoffman, I know. That's why we'll frame it as emotional abuse and implied threats. His military background will do the rest. Judge will err on side of caution.
When do we file? Hoffman, I'll draft the complaint this week. Iris's hands shook as she photographed every page, every email, every piece of evidence proving her mother and her attorney had fabricated the entire accusation. Her father hadn't been violent, hadn't been unstable, hadn't refused therapy because he'd never needed it in the first place. He'd been a grieving warrior trying to process the loss of his brother and his team, and they'd weaponized that grief to steal custody and freedom. Her phone buzzed. A text from Coach Torres. Rowland's preliminary hearing is tomorrow. Walsh says it's not looking good. Iris looked at the evidence in her hands, the proof that could save her father from prison and finally clear his name after 7 years of carrying false accusations. But using it meant destroying her mother's life. She thought about her father mopping floors in silence, enduring Chase's abuse without complaint, choosing invisibility over dignity because he believed he deserved punishment. She thought about 8 Navy SEALs who died following his orders, including Uncle Kevin, whose portrait she'd found in her father's storage unit. She thought about a good man who'd spent 7 years believing he was a bad one. Then Iris Murphy did what her father had trained her to do without knowing it. She made the hard choice that leadership demanded. She sent the evidence to Jennifer Walsh with a simple message. My father isn't the liar in this family. Here's proof. Rowland's preliminary hearing Tuesday morning felt like a formality designed to confirm his destruction. The courtroom was packed with Chase's supporters wearing Trainer Safety Matters t-shirts that Kellerman's PR team had distributed. Media filled the back rows, and somewhere in the crowd, Iris sat with Coach Torres, clutching her phone with evidence that could save her father, if Walsh could figure out how to use it in time. Assistant State Attorney Marcus Webb presented his case with prosecutorial efficiency. The viral video showing Rowland's knockout punch played on courtroom monitors. Medical records documented Chase's concussion, jaw contusion, and ongoing symptoms of traumatic brain injury. The defendant is a former Navy SEAL team leader with over a decade of lethal combat training, Webb argued. He deliberately concealed this background from his employer, then used professional-level violence against a civilian instructor in what can only be described as a premeditated assault. Kellerman had coached Chase perfectly. His testimony was measured, sympathetic, designed to paint himself as the victim of a dangerous man he tried to help. I knew Rowland had military experience, Chase said, his voice soft with fabricated trauma. I'd heard rumors about PTSD, about struggles adjusting to civilian life. I thought giving him an opportunity to engage with the fighting community in a controlled way might help him channel his aggression constructively. And how did Mr. Murphy respond to your attempt to help? Webb prompted. He challenged me to fight. I thought it would be a light demonstration, maybe boost his confidence. Instead, he attacked me with what I now understand was professional combat technique designed to cause maximum damage with minimal effort. The lie was so smooth it was almost beautiful. Rowland sat at the defense table, watching Chase transform 3 months of systematic harassment into a narrative of concerned mentorship betrayed. I honestly thought he was going to kill me, Chase continued, his voice breaking at the perfect moment. I've trained fighters for 7 years, and I've never seen that level of cold, calculated violence. It was like he enjoyed hurting me. Walsh's cross-examination was hampered by lack of preparation and overwhelming caseload. She tried to establish the harassment pattern, but without evidence, it was Rowland's word against Chase's, and Chase had Kellerman's expensive coaching.
Isn't it true you repeatedly humiliated Mr. Murphy over several months? Walsh asked.
Absolutely not. I maintained appropriate employer-employee boundaries. If Rowland felt criticized, it was because his cleaning work was often substandard. You posted a video of him online with mocking captions. I posted a video showing an interesting moment during training. If Rowland felt embarrassed, that suggests his own insecurity, not my intent.
Kellerman smiled from the plaintiff's table. Every answer had been rehearsed, every trap anticipated.
But then Webb played his nuclear card.
Your Honor, the state would like to introduce evidence of the defendant's prior history of violent behavior. Webb distributed copies of Vanessa's 2017 domestic violence complaint. Court records show that Lieutenant Murphy's ex-wife filed for protection based on his threatening behavior and emotional instability following his military discharge. Her attorney specifically noted concerns about his mental state and capacity for violence.
The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Media scribbled notes. Chase's supporters nodded knowingly. They'd been right all along about the dangerous veteran.
Rowland felt the walls closing in. The false accusation that had haunted him for 7 years was now being used to send him to prison for defending himself against months of abuse.
Furthermore, Webb continued, psychological evaluations recommended during the divorce proceedings specifically cited PTSD symptomology and recommended ongoing therapy, which Mr. Murphy refused to attend.
That's not true, Rowland said quietly, the first words he'd spoken during the hearing.
Mr. Murphy, please refrain from, Judge Hawkins began. I was never unstable, never violent, never refused therapy because I never needed therapy in the first place. My ex-wife's attorney fabricated that accusation to win custody. It was a lie then, and it's being used as a weapon now.
Your Honor, this outburst demonstrates exactly the kind of volatility, Webb began. I have evidence, Walsh interrupted, finally finding her spine. Evidence that just came to light this morning proving the domestic violence accusation was fabricated.
The courtroom fell silent.
What evidence? Judge Hawkins demanded.
Walsh pulled up her email on her phone, projecting Iris's photographs onto the courtroom screen. The email exchanges between Vanessa and Attorney Hoffman appeared in crystal clarity. Their conspiracy to fabricate accusations laid bare for everyone to read.
Doesn't need to be proven, just filed. Combined with his recent discharge in the Afghanistan incident, it'll paint a picture of instability. The courtroom exploded. Media surged forward. Chase's supporters looked confused, and Webb's confident expression crumbled as he realized his entire case had just been built on provable lies. Where did this come from? Webb demanded. The defendant's daughter found it in her mother's files, Walsh said, her voice stronger now. Email correspondence between Vanessa Murphy and her divorce attorney explicitly discussing how to fabricate domestic violence allegations to secure custody. There was never any violence, never any instability, never any refused therapy. It was a coordinated legal strategy to weaponize the court system against a grieving veteran. Judge Hawkins studied the documents with growing anger. Ms. Walsh, I need verified copies of these communications.
I have the originals, Your Honor, Iris called from the gallery, standing up with her phone. I took them from my mother's home office. I can provide access to her email account to verify authenticity.
Rowland turned to see his daughter, 17 years old, terrified, brave, standing up to destroy her own mother to save him.
Iris, no, he said. You don't have to.
Yes, I do, Dad. You've protected me my whole life. Now it's my turn.
Should a daughter have to choose between her parents to prove the truth? Tell us in the comments.
Judge Hawkins called a recess while the evidence was authenticated. Forensic examination of Vanessa's email account confirmed every word. The communications were real, dated, and devastating.
When court reconvened 2 hours later, the atmosphere had completely shifted.
Mr. Webb, Judge Hawkins said, her voice carrying judicial ice, it appears your entire argument regarding the defendant's history of violence is based on fabricated allegations. Do you have any actual evidence of prior violent behavior?
Webb looked like he'd swallowed glass. Your Honor, even if the domestic violence allegation was exaggerated, the current assault charge stands. The defendant used professional combat training to cause serious bodily harm. After months of documented workplace harassment, Walsh interrupted, finally in command of her case. Your Honor, I have security footage from Velocity Fight Club showing a pattern of systematic abuse by Mr. Fitzgerald against my client.
She'd gotten the footage from Elena Rodriguez, who'd finally found her conscience at 2 a.m. Tuesday morning, and sent Walsh 3 months of security recordings showing Chase's harassment campaign in brutal detail.
The courtroom watched in silence as Chase kicked Rowland's cleaning bucket, forced him into humiliating demonstrations, mocked him in front of students, and physically shoved him during the confrontation that started everything.
This wasn't an unprovoked assault, Walsh argued. This was a man defending himself after months of abuse, forced into a fight by his harasser, using minimal necessary force to end the confrontation. One punch, that's all. One perfectly controlled strike that ended the threat without continued violence.
Chase's face had gone pale. Kellerman was whispering urgently in his ear, recognizing that their carefully constructed victim narrative was collapsing.
Mr. Fitzgerald, Judge Hawkins said, did you or did you not systematically harass Mr. Murphy over a period of several months?
Chase looked at Kellerman, who gave a tiny shake of his head. But the footage had already told the truth.
I maintained appropriate workplace standards, Chase stammered.
You publicly challenged him to fight, did you not?
It was meant to be educational.
Yes or no, Mr. Fitzgerald?
Yes.
And when the fight began, you attacked first with multiple strikes, as shown in the viral video?
Chase's silence was answer enough. Judge Hawkins looked at the evidence, the videos, the emails, the pattern of abuse and false accusations spanning 7 years, all designed to destroy one man who'd already sacrificed everything for his country.
Charges dismissed, she announced. Mr. Murphy, you're free to go. Mr. Webb, I suggest the state attorney's office review its procedures for vetting prior allegations before using them to prosecute veterans. And Mr. Fitzgerald?
She paused, her expression hardening. I'm referring this matter to the Florida Athletic Commission for investigation into your conduct and credentials. Bailiff, we're adjourned. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Media swarmed. Chase sat frozen in shock, and Rowland Murphy finally allowed himself to breathe.
Iris pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around her father. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry about Mom.
You saved me, Rowland whispered. You did what I should have done 7 years ago. You fought back.
Coach Torres appeared beside them, grinning. Now let's get you out of here before they change their minds.
But as they left the courthouse, Rowland saw Chase being confronted by reporters, his carefully constructed empire crumbling in real time. The fight wasn't over yet. The viral video that had destroyed Chase Fitzgerald's reputation now destroyed his career. Within 24 hours of the dismissed charges, the footage of his courtroom humiliation, the revealed harassment, the exposed lies, the fabricated narrative had been viewed over 5 million times. Professional MMA organizations shared it with commentary about toxic coaching culture and fraudulent credentials. But the real damage came from deeper investigation. Sports journalist Marcus Chin had been following the story since the original knockout video. Now he dug into Chase's background with investigative rigor, and what he found was damning.
Chase Fitzgerald's certification as an MMA instructor came from a weekend online course, not years of legitimate training. His claimed professional fighting record of 7-2 was fabricated. No sanctioned organization had any record of his bouts. His entire resume was a construction of bought credentials and family money.
Chen's expose published Wednesday morning in the Miami Herald under the headline, Velocity Trainer Built Career on Lies, Harassment, and Family Wealth. The article detailed everything. The fake credentials, the systematic harassment of Rowland and 3 other former employees who came forward with similar stories, the weaponization of false accusations, and the complete lack of actual fighting experience. Chase Fitzgerald is what happens when privilege meets insecurity, Chen wrote. He bought a reputation he never earned, then destroyed anyone who threatened to expose the truth. By noon, Velocity Fight Club's ownership had issued a statement. We have terminated Chase Fitzgerald's employment effective immediately. An internal investigation has revealed serious concerns about his credentials and conduct. We apologize to Lieutenant Rowland Murphy and any other employees who experienced harassment during Mr. Fitzgerald's tenure. The Florida Athletic Commission opened a formal investigation that afternoon.
Mr. Fitzgerald's certification to operate as a combat sports instructor has been suspended pending review, the commission announced. Preliminary findings suggest serious violations of ethical standards and misrepresentation of credentials. Chase's social media following collapsed from 180,000 to 23,000 in 48 hours as sponsors fled and former supporters deleted their endorsements. His Instagram became a graveyard of deleted posts and disabled comments.
But the legal consequences were just beginning.
Attorney Gerald Hoffman, Vanessa's divorce lawyer who'd conspired to fabricate the domestic violence accusations, found himself facing a Florida bar investigation after Iris's evidence went public. Fabricating allegations was grounds for disbarment, and the email evidence was irrefutable.
I provided zealous advocacy within the bounds of, Hoffman's statement began, before his own attorney advised him to stop talking.
Vanessa Murphy released a carefully worded statement through her publicist. I deeply regret any misunderstandings that occurred during a difficult divorce. My only concern was my daughter's well-being.
Iris read her mother's statement and blocked her number. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven with careful PR language. Thursday afternoon brought unexpected visitors to Rowland's apartment. Elena Rodriguez and Coach Torres arrived together, carrying news and an opportunity. Velocity's ownership wants to offer you a position, Elena said. Head instructor, complete authority over training programs and staff hiring, salary of $85,000 plus bonuses. They're trying to make things right.
Rowland stood in his modest living room, looking at the offer that would solve every financial problem he'd faced for 7 years.
Then he shook his head. No.
Rowland, this is... Torres began.
I appreciate it, but I'm not interested in salvaging someone else's broken gym. If I'm going to teach again, I'm building something new, something that stands for what my father taught me: discipline, respect, and real warrior ethics. Torres smiled slowly. Then let me help you build it.
By Friday, Second Truth MMA existed as more than just an idea.
Coach Torres contributed his life savings, $50,000 he'd been holding for retirement. Elena Rodriguez quit Velocity to serve as operations manager, and the crowdfunding campaign that Iris started, Help a Hero Build a Gym, raised $200,000 in 72 hours from supporters worldwide who'd followed Rowland's story. The name came from Rowland's conversation with Iris about the 2 lies that had nearly destroyed him: Chase's harassment narrative and Vanessa's false accusations.
We teach Second Truth here, Rowland explained to the Miami Herald reporter covering the gym's opening. The truth that emerges after the lies are exposed. The truth that some people spend years trying to bury. The truth that warriors protect, even when it costs them everything.
The gym's mission statement, written in Rowland's careful handwriting, covered the entrance wall.
We train warriors, not bullies. We build strength to protect others, not dominate them. We demand respect by showing respect. Everyone deserves the truth, a second chance, and the skills to defend both.
Second Truth MMA opened its doors in a renovated warehouse in Wynwood 2 months after the courthouse dismissal. The 8,000-square-foot facility featured professional-grade equipment, a full-size octagon, and photographs honoring fallen warriors, including 8 Navy SEALs from Team 7, with Kevin Murphy's portrait holding the place of honor.
The student base grew rapidly. Combat veterans seeking community and purpose, falsely accused men and women who'd lost careers to fabricated allegations, children from low-income neighborhoods who needed discipline and protection. Everyone united by Rowland's philosophy that real strength comes from character, not violence.
Iris deferred Stanford for 1 year to help launch the gym, managing social media and student outreach with the same fierce dedication she'd shown finding evidence to save her father. Her TikTok account documenting the gym's growth reached 400,000 followers, each video emphasizing themes of justice, truth, and second chances.
Professional fighters began visiting to train with the man whose perfect technique and unwavering character had exposed the difference between real warriors and pretenders. Former UFC champion Daniel Cormier posted a training video with Rowland, calling him one of the most important martial arts instructors in America. The scholarship program, funded entirely by donations from Second Truth supporters, provided free training to over 100 students who couldn't afford membership. Rowland's requirement was simple: learn to fight so you'll never have to. Build strength so you can protect others.
Demand truth, because lies destroy lives. Chase Fitzgerald's fall continued its trajectory. The Athletic Commission's investigation concluded with permanent revocation of his credentials. Civil lawsuits from 3 former employees who'd experienced similar harassment sought damages totaling $300,000. And without family money to sustain his lifestyle, Chase took a job at a corporate gym in Tampa, teaching basic fitness classes for $18 an hour.
His Instagram bio changed from elite MMA coach and performance specialist to simply fitness instructor. No photos, no videos, no trace of the empire he'd built on lies. Attorney Hoffman accepted a 2-year suspension from practicing law rather than face disbarment proceedings. Vanessa Murphy's reputation in Miami's social circles collapsed as details of her fabricated accusations spread. Her current boyfriend left. Job opportunities dried up. The comfortable life she'd built on lies became unsustainable. 6 months after Second Truth opened, Rowland received an unexpected letter. It was from Chase, handwritten, postmarked from Tampa. Lieutenant Murphy, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that what you've built, the gym, the mission, the movement, showed me what I should have been instead of what I was. You had every reason to destroy me completely. Instead, you built something that helps people. That's the difference between us. I tore people down to feel strong. You lift people up because you actually are strong. I'm trying to do better. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. But watching what you've accomplished makes me want to be less of what I was. Chase. Rowland read the letter twice, then filed it away. Forgiveness wasn't his to give or withhold. Chase would have to live with his choices, just as Rowland had lived with his. But at least now, Rowland was living instead of hiding. Subscribe so you never miss how liars finally face the truth. Second Truth MMA became more than a gym. It became a movement, proving that some warriors survive, not by fighting harder, but by refusing to let guilt and lies define them. That real strength comes from standing up after years of being pushed down. That the truth, no matter how long it's buried, eventually demands to be heard. And that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimated, not because he wanted to hurt anyone, but because he finally remembered he didn't have to accept being hurt anymore. Lieutenant Rowland P. Murphy had spent 7 years believing he deserved punishment for his brother's death. Now he spent his days teaching others that survival isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight back. Not with violence. With truth. 1 year after the knockout that changed everything, Lieutenant Rowland P. Murphy stood in the center of Second Truth MMA, watching his daughter throw combinations that would have made her grandfather proud. Iris had deferred Stanford, but not abandoned it. She'd spend her gap year building something more valuable than any classroom could teach, the knowledge that truth, no matter how long it's buried, eventually demands to be heard. Keep your right hand up, Rowland instructed, moving around her with the same patient precision his father had used 4 decades earlier in a Philadelphia gym. Power comes from technique, not effort. Iris suggested, her movements showing months of dedicated training. At 18, she'd become the face of Second Truth's mission. Her TikTok documenting falsely accused athletes, wrongfully terminated workers, and veterans fighting legal battles against fabricated allegations had reached 800,000 followers. Like this? She threw a perfect combination, jab, cross, hook, that snapped the heavy bag back 3 feet. Exactly like that. Rowland smiled, seeing his father's legacy, his brother's memory, and his daughter's future flowing through a single moment of perfect technique. Second Truth MMA had grown beyond Miami. The documentary, Second Truth, the Rowland Murphy story, premiered at Tribeca Film Festival, earning critical acclaim for its unflinching examination of false accusations and the power of evidence over narrative. Netflix acquired distribution rights, bringing Rowland's story to 60 million viewers worldwide. Over 400 gyms across North America had adopted the Second Truth standards, mandatory anti-harassment policies, verification of instructor credentials, and zero tolerance for weaponizing false accusations. The International Mixed Martial Arts Federation created an annual award in Rowland's name, recognizing instructors who embodied warrior ethics over toxic dominance.
The scholarship program had expanded to serve 300 students annually. Combat veterans found community and purpose. Falsely accused men and women discovered support systems that believed evidence over whispers. Children from broken homes learned that discipline could replace chaos. Coach Torres, now 71, served as head instructor while Rowland focused on expanding Second Truth's mission nationally. Elena Rodriguez had transformed operations into a model of ethical business practices studied by sports management programs.
The wall of portraits honoring fallen warriors had grown. 8 Navy SEALs from Team 7 still held the place of honor, with Kevin Murphy's smile frozen in time, forever 26, forever warning his older brother about dangerous valleys. Rowland stood before his brother's portrait every morning, no longer apologizing, but reporting, telling Kevin about the lives they were changing, the truths they were protecting, the warriors they were building.
"I finally listened to you," Rowland would whisper. "Took me 7 years, but I listened." Chase Fitzgerald never contacted him again after that one letter. Attorney Hoffman was disbarred after additional fabrication evidence surfaced in unrelated cases. Vanessa Murphy had moved to Atlanta, her Miami social circle permanently closed to her.
Their consequences were their own to carry. Rowland had spent 7 years carrying guilt that wasn't entirely his. Now he carried something different. Purpose born from pain, leadership earned through humility, and the knowledge that some victories require losing everything first to understand what actually matters. As the afternoon sun streamed through Second Truth's windows, casting long shadows across mats where former enemies now trained together as brothers, Rowland watched Iris help a shy 12-year-old girl find her stance. The girl's mother had brought her after a false accusation at school nearly destroyed her daughter's reputation. The teacher who'd fabricated the story had been exposed by security footage, but the damage to the girl's confidence remained. Until Iris showed her that survivors don't just heal, they transform into protectors. "You're stronger than you know," Iris told the girl, adjusting her guard position. "And you never have to be afraid of the truth again." Rowland's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Chen, the journalist who'd exposed Chase's fraudulent credentials. Stanford reached out. They want to offer Iris a full scholarship with deferred admission. Your daughter's work exposing false accusations caught their attention. He showed Iris the message. She read it, smiled, then returned to teaching the 12-year-old proper footwork. "Later, Dad. This is more important right now." And it was. Because Second Truth MMA wasn't about fighting. It was about teaching people that they didn't have to accept lies as truth, abuse as deserved, or silence as safety. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is finally stop being invisible. Sometimes justice takes 7 years and a single perfect punch. Sometimes the warrior you thought you'd lost is just waiting for permission to stand up again. Lieutenant Rowland P. Murphy had lost his brother, his team, his career, his marriage, and 7 years of his life to guilt and fabricated accusations. But he'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that truth, combined with courage, eventually defeats every lie. His father had trained champions. Now Rowland was training truth-tellers. And in a world that often chose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, that might be the most important fight of all. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do and watched people believe the lie instead of your service, your character, and your truth? Please don't forget to like and subscribe. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear a warm-hearting story.